everyone. Welcome to the SkyPyre podcast in no particular order. My name is Tyson. I'll be your host this evening, and joining me tonight, I've got Michael and David, the two writers of Halon, Ballad of the Blade Thief.
Well, two of the writers.
Yes.
I also give Nick credit.
Yes, Nick
hello.
is our he's our like dialogue expert, I would say.
I mean, I don't know if we're split up in those kinds of. I think we've all done all the parts individually.
Yeah. But I would say like as far as like things that we're strongest with, I would say like you, David, you're the best at like coming up with weird, wacky, broad ideas. And then I tend to put things together into a story, and then Nick he came out best, at least when it came to Halon, with just bringing that all down to earth with some really good dialogue. Like we had dialogue written, but he punched it up. He's a punch it up. He's like a puncher upper. You know how in Hollywood they got someone punches up the script.
Well, regardless, I think that may be true.
Yeah,
but,
we're a great team.
That's true. It
Anyways,
really is a team process, I guess, coming up with a good story. So to start us off, I'd like to talk a little bit about the story for Halon, because I was not privy to the beginning of the development. And
this week we're going to be talking about our process for writing stories.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and our thoughts on that.
So I wanted to start you guys off with a little bit of a throwback, I guess, to summer and fall of 2016, when you guys were starting your senior project, where you came up with Halon, Ballad of the Blade Thief, and I wanted to get your ideas and your perspectives on, you know, what sort of things came to your mind when you were coming up with the story. Like, was there specific beats and motifs you wanted to hit?
Yeah. I'll start us off with that answer. Well, to begin with, we started off thinking about gameplay first. The game, you know, we had this notion that there would be this character with like a sword and a gun. That was like the start.
Yeah.
And then we had this notion. Yeah, Michael. Yeah.
I remember pitching, basically, let's make it an Indiana Jones style game, but it's sci-fi.
Yeah, well,
and
I mean,
Indiana Jones has to crawl to the bottom of this pit and then find his way out.
Well, no, I mean, I'm saying no. I'm not even there yet. I'm not even at an actual story, because I think what we went from person with sword and gun to the notion of, oh, there's this like duality, right? There's like this some kind of like there's these two. Oh, this person has like a sword and a gun, and there's this this kind of connection between these two. We were thinking in gameplay terms at the time, but also
I suppose before we got that pit idea.
Yeah, I'm not near.
There was Andrew's fighting game.
Yes.
What did he want to base the game on? What was it called again?
We wanted to base it
Bungie's
off
game.
Well, there were plenty of things. He was talking about what was that game called? The little Flash Dojo game.
Oh no, but I'm talking about mainly that 3D game that he was really into back in the day.
Oni.
Oni, yeah. So we had Oni in our head to a certain extent.
But yeah,
the
notion of like these, I think my memory of how it developed is, so we had sword and gun. Then we were like, okay, well, there's these two things, and we were thinking about them in terms of two colors. And then we were like, well, what if one of them's like some kind of old thing, and the other one's like a new thing? And then we had this idea of like old and new, and two kind of weapons and stuff like that. And then I think that's when we got the Indiana Jones angle.
Yeah, I guess thinking about the old, we thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you don't have the old sword thing right away? What if you find it as an artifact? You pick it up, and then you got to use it to fight your way out.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think from there, it started being like, well, okay, you're up, you know. Who are you? What kind of world do you live in? And what kind of place is this pit. I think we had this notion of this like vertical. We wanted a vertical game going
Yeah.
up instead of like forward.
Yeah.
And I think
with a vertical game, we needed you to be able to like move upwards really easily, and that's where we thought, well, what if you can kind of stick your sword out and dash in that direction, you know?
yeah, yeah, and also a pit lent itself to uh this notion of, oh, you're going down into the ground, right? And then combining with this Indiana Jones style idea, um and then with this dashing idea, obviously it quickly became more and more of a sci-fi kind of angle to it.
Yeah, I think we always wanted to do sci-fi. Sci-fi was
I
kind
think
of
so, yeah, but
sci-fi was kind of our thing. Our previous game together was a sci-fi game, and then I guess you guys made that dark side game. So sci-fi is our kind of our wheelhouse,
Yeah.
yeah,
and it's something that inspires all of us. I think we'll get to some other inspirations later, but like we're all, a lot of us were big fans of Halo and those kinds of games.
yeah. So, and then I think from that basic idea of like, oh, you go in, you're some kind of Indiana Jones style character, and you're going down, and you're trying to get this artifact. And I think from there, I don't have a clear memory of this, but I think from there we started thinking about like, okay, why are you going down there? What's this world? What's gonna be? What are you gonna fight? What's
Yeah,
you think about those kinds of things, and the answers to those can form the basis of the conflict in the story, right? So
yeah. I think what I love about game, like writing story for games, is that you don't have this like blank canvas. You have gameplay ideas, and those inform the story, and then the story informs the gameplay, and it's a feedback loop. And I think that's why I always struggled to, like, I remember taking writing classes and writing short stories and stuff, and it was always really really tough to come up with details. Like I could come up with broad stories, but as far as details went, that took a lot of time. But I think when you're writing for a game, the gameplay helps you, kind of blocks you in almost, and forces you to come up with certain answers to certain questions that are very
yeah,
specific.
yeah, I think so. And I think the next kind of step in the story development is that uh, we wanted to create a character. We were having these ideas about like this ancient stuff, and I think we wanted to have a character just like, the classic kind of thing. Like you want a character who doesn't know about the things, so you're learning about it at the same time as they're learning about it.
Yeah,
And then I think we had this notion, which I think is a really neat idea, if I do say so myself, that the going upwards, going from the bottom to the top, you know, a that's just the gameplay progression, but you can build in like the thematic aspect of that, and you
yeah,
can also have bits of the story, like you're learning about the past of this galaxy in Halon Battle of Blade Thief in these layers. Like there's these layers of history
right.
Right.
that you're moving through. So
And
not
we
only
needed to figure out how can we tell you about these layers without, just literal signs that say, "Hey, here's the lore here."
yeah,
And
so
that's
yeah,
where we combine kind of like the idea of a character that's telling you things with the literal object that you steal.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because just like in real life, the further you go down into the ground, the older the things are that you're finding.
Hmm. And those things tell
So
stories.
yes, and basically this notion that, oh, okay, so we're telling the story as you're going upwards, as you're reaching these different chunks, these different slices
Hmm.
of the history. So
Yeah.
we're building it all around this. So we built Halon all around this movement, right? It's a big upwards kind of like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And both characters are are trying to figure out how the other works and how to work together and whether they trust each other and all that kind of stuff. And that mirrors gameplay of you like increasing in your ability and understanding how to control the player better or the character better. And yeah, so I think it was a cool idea.
So like this whole idea of like ascension and stuff, it seems like it was a pretty big building block for not just the story but also the gameplay. Was that like an assignment requirement or something, or was that just something that came into your heads like, hey, this would be cool?
No requirement.
No, we could do whatever we wanted as long
Yeah,
as long as we were capable of finishing it and it filled the time.
Yeah, I mean, we just liked the idea of, so it just sort of fits all of these things, right? Because it becomes it's like this redemption story for these characters. So
Hmm.
I think at the time, I don't know for sure, but I feel like probably uninspiration was like The Dark Knight Rises.
Okay,
With
yeah.
Yeah, I
the
bet
pit
that
there?
was
I
that
bet
was
it
kind of in the back
was.
of our heads.
Um,
Not that
but
I
this-
like that movie, but
Not that, yes, but it still had this notion of like, oh, they're trapped in this pit and they're rising out of their bad circumstances. And so
Yeah.
that idea combined with, we wanted like this free, open kind of gameplay as far as movement and floating platforms and all of that. So it all just kind of worked together, gameplay and thematically.
what I really liked about the
Whoa.
characters is that we have Halon, who's kind of from this she's kind of an ignorant person from the future that doesn't know really anything about her past or she doesn't know any history. And then we have this intelligence in a sword that's been trapped there in the bottom of the pit, and he doesn't know anything about his future. So we got like he doesn't know what happened to the galaxy since he's been down there. So we have these two characters that are in the dark about one's in the dark about the past and one's in the dark about the future, and they have to explain it to each other. And
Yeah, they're both
they don't
missing
necessarily
pieces.
believe each other at different parts, but
Yeah, they're both
Yeah.
missing pieces of information the other could use.
yeah,
Yeah,
they rely on each other. They're forced to rely on each other. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think fundamentally, another fundamental thing is going back to this idea of duality, right? So just even from the very beginning, like we were like, oh, sword and gun, old and new, right? You got Halon and Sharp, who are basically the avatars of those two concepts.
Yeah, and they have very different personalities.
Different perspectives, different
Like-
attitudes,
Like Halon is very aloof
pragmatic.
and pragmatic and kind of just wants to get moving, whereas Sharp's more like thoughtful and yeah. I think one of the problems with our game is that we didn't have a ton of time to get deep into a lot of things we wanted to. We only had so much time to tell our story.
Yeah,
So we had to be very choosy with with the scenes and all that kind of stuff. So we stuck to
yeah. The
we
big
stuck to
parts.
one main story, one big part. So
Yeah.
we had to cut things. We had to cut like we had this whole plot with the doctor, who you
Which
just
you
hear
get a little bit of.
you get a bit of it, but we had more of that. We had like a whole big plot with the Kargs, which you really so there's all these different parts. We cut the fat to get right down to the two main characters.
Yeah.
Just for the audience, the Kargs were the main enemy in the game. A kind of a bunch of these like crazed robots. Which
Yeah.
again, yeah, it's like we didn't really get the time to really explore the notion of like a crazy tribe of lost robots, right? Like that.
Yeah.
We didn't really do a lot with that
Yeah.
idea.
You know, like
Or
that
anything, really.
the crazy robot from Treasure Planet.
Yeah,
We wanted a planet of that.
yeah.
A horde of them.
It's definitely like, I mean, we're no EA, right? We can't develop a game in a year. But that's kind of what you had to do for senior project, right? You've got 1 year to make a project start to finish. And
Yeah.
And of course, we had other things to work on at the same
Of
time.
course.
And it was our first time writing a story game.
yeah. So I mean, speaking as an outsider who watched the development of the project mostly through YouTube, but also hanging out with you guys every once in a while, I can definitely say that hearing it at the beginning, it seemed like a very ambitious project. So I can definitely understand from
Yeah.
that perspective. Like if you've got so little time to work on something, you really gotta trim the fat and make sure your scope is not getting blown to pieces. And
I thought we were all crazy. I remember in the beginning, Nick was saying things like, "Oh, we're gonna have 6 levels or 12 levels or something
12
like
levels.
that,"
Yeah, it was like, what?
and I was like, "What?"
are you out of your
and
mind?
but we got. I think I'm happy with all that we got in. David, do you remember anything else? Any interesting stories from writing it?
Um,
I remember we had like basically the script, or we had like the outline written, but it was messy and we didn't know how things were going to be, and it was kind of getting down to it. And so what we did was just went into the second cup downstairs for like 3 days, 3 or 4 days straight. Remember that, David?
yeah.
Me, you, and Nick, and we just pounded through that whole script and just went at it, and we
How
Yeah, we
came out the other end with an actual story.
how unbelievably
And I don't.
typical that you guys went
listen,
into a coffee shop to write a story.
listen, it's a good environment. It's legitimately a good environment to
Yeah.
write. It's a very, like, compared to like a computer lab, it's,
That's definitely true.
you know, when writing and those kinds of creative, like, collaborative endeavors, it's much like a more open,
Yeah.
you're sitting there more relaxed. In a computer lab, it's a lot more of like a go 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 do work kind of environment, whereas like in a coffee shop, you're just
Yeah.
chilling, drinking some whatever thing. And
When
you
we
need
when
that
we
kind
get
of
to
thing.
the script writing phase of our of a
Next
future
game,
game, I think we're definitely going to emulate that again.
I
We
think
should just
so.
go to that same second cup.
I
Mm,
mean, I mean,
I don't think it's there anymore. I think it got replaced by another coffee shop or something weird.
the third cup.
Yeah.
I mean, if it worked once, I'm sure it could work again, right?
And,
Uh,
and here's another big important thing about the script is that you write your script, but the story doesn't stay the same there. Like there's further
Yeah.
refining that occurs when you start recording the dialogue with the actors. And that's something that happened a lot is we had our dialogue written and it was good, but once you start hearing the actors saying it, you start to hear. I think that's why table reads are so important. Is you start to hear how the actors are interpreting it, and you suddenly see a part of the character that you didn't see before, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to change that dialogue to fit more with the way they're performing it.
did you
So I
guys
think that's
Yeah.
did you guys do table reads for Halon, or was it just straight to the VO box? Off we go.
We did a table read.
I think we did a table read.
We
Yeah,
100% did a table read.
I don't have a memory of it, but
I had to leave near the beginning of it, but we did do
oh,
one.
I remember now. Yeah, yeah. So we read through it, and then we got into this, but then we made changes that we went through that, and then we got into the recording booth and recorded it. And through that, we came up. There was like some oh, what's the word when you come up with stuff on the fly? I've lost it.
Improvise.
Improvise.
Yeah, we improvised a few things, and
Yeah.
like it was me, Nick, and then the two actors, and we were in there
Yeah.
and kind of came up with stuff as we went. And then that's not even the last edit you make, because then you're actually putting the dialogue in the game. And there was some like gameplay dialogue that we had recorded that we just didn't know where to put it in into our actual physical levels that we had built. So we had to cut further from there,
Yeah,
and then we ended with our final game.
Yeah. Yeah. So zooming out to going from that to like zooming out to just like a general story writing philosophy is that just like everything else, writing a story needs to go through iteration.
Yeah.
And it's
I think
so
that was. Sorry,
it's
David.
so important to the quality of the characters and the flow and the continuity of what's this character's personality, what do they know, what do they not know, like that kind of just being able to do a story that has all of those things in it. Just you need to do this kind of iteration in these multiple stages that you're changing things. You're like, well, you know, line of dialogue seemed nice, but it turns out you don't actually really need it, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Or man, it would be really great if we had a line in this part because there's this big gap that we didn't anticipate because of this gameplay thing. But if I may be so bold, I feel like a lot of even like movies, even like big budget movies,
Uh-huh.
seemingly like lack in this kind of thing.
Well, something I've noticed a lot lately with a lot of movies that I was really looking forward to is that everything was such high quality. The acting was great, the visual effects were great. All the pieces were there, but it felt like I felt like I was listening to a first draft of a script,
Yeah,
and I don't know
yeah,
why
it
this is
does.
happening, but I feel like a lot of things have been underwritten, and I don't know what's influencing that. Do you have any ideas?
I don't have any insight into. Here's the thing. It
Hollywood works.
I'm baffled by it also because yeah, it's like all of the things that you imagine are like the big difficult things, the big time-consuming difficult things, i.e., the effects, the acting, the costumes, the music, the cinematography, the locations, the whatever, the action. They're generally great, but it's just like
Mhm.
the dialogue and just like the continuity of like, wait a minute, how does that guy now has this opinion for some reason, even though earlier in the movie he was doing this, or
Mhm.
how does he have this thing on his person when in the previous and it's
And that's not to say our game was devoid
oh certainly
of
not.
plot holes and
Yes,
stuff. We
it
we've
certainly was.
we went through and heavily critiqued it afterwards, but we had a lot of hats we were wearing, so we couldn't spend all day fixing it up. But I found that we got done with the most important things, which is people connecting to our characters and
Yeah.
keeping it simple and but keeping it simple while also hinting at a broader I guess
World.
bedrock for the story. I don't know, a broader world. That's what I love most about a good fantasy story is that you feel like there's just if you just look at that other planet or you just
Just go to a
you
different
know
city.
go to a different city or look over that mountain, you're gonna find something completely different and interesting. But I don't know.
You'd think with
Yeah.
all the time you spend in school, like analyzing stories, like especially in English class, right? You're reading these books and you're talking about like the themes and the motifs and how things are written. You'd think that using all that knowledge, you'd be able to translate that to be able to actually write something
Mm,
similar. But like sometimes the connection just isn't there. Like I couldn't write a story to save my life.
yeah, well, just like anything, it requires practice.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
wrote. I should bring you guys my big book of short stories I've written.
hmm.
a
I
big
bet
book
you.
of short stories.
But anyways,
Yeah.
What's up, Shell?
all right, all right. We can talk about that later. Uh, but moving on to, I want to talk about like narrative discussion, and a lot of this is like the same kind of stuff as in like a movie or a TV show, but just talking about it and then how it changes for a video game. So the notion of acts, right? The notion of this plot structure that all of the like that media has, and how does that apply to video games? Because a lot of games are just directly apply it, right? Like games that are like, oh, this is a story game, right? They
Yeah.
have very specific like, oh, well, this is the first act, this is the right. But I
Hmm.
think that video games have the opportunity to not necessarily follow that strict setup kind of thing. And for the project we are currently working on, we're our narrative structure, we're basing it off of, I think it's 5 acts.
Yeah.
And one key thing is that we're working on it in the form of questions and answers. And what that means is that every act, there's the driving force of the narrative part of that act is some question, something that you want to find out.
Yeah.
And
so Act 1 has a question, and then Act 1 ends with an answer to that question, but that answer leads to the next question, which begins Act 2, and then it just continues from there.
Yeah. And so what this can do in a video game is that it can provide this constant narrative momentum that guides the player to, the question could be like, oh, it could be small questions, right? Like, oh, how do I get across that chasm? Or, or something more, more esoteric, like, oh, what's going on in this facility, kind of thing, right? And then it's like, oh, we got into the facility, and it turns out there's demon worshippers. Okay, what do the demon worshippers want? That's the new question.
Yeah.
And then you're.
Yeah.
And you can break up each of these larger sections of questions into smaller questions that help answer the bigger question. And then what's great about that is it helps with your story, but then you can also, once you set up this pillar of questions, it helps on the story side, but it also helps on the gameplay side. So, or just like map design, art design,
yes,
music. You basically use it almost as like themes, so you can attach themes to those questions.
Yes.
And we found that it was really helpful it's being really helpful for having a clear artistic vision for each section of the game.
Yes, because you can take these acts and you can turn them into, let's say, like chapters of your game or levels. Very easily. Like they lend themselves to that kind of thing. And then, like Michael was saying, the question and like the tone of it can, this is more branching into another aspect of this whole discussion, but the story of that, let's say a chunk of the game, can be told through all sorts of things in that area. So not just like not just dialogue, not just cutscenes. You can do things like, obviously things like music, but you can do things like the lighting and what kind of textures and what kind of shapes the environment has and what sort of challenges there are in that level. All of these things can come together to support the story that's being told in that area.
Yeah. For example, you could have one question could be like, for like one act, the question could be, what is this place that the character finds themselves in? Like, what's it for? And then you would put things in the environment that answer that question, or at least hint at that question. You have your characters talk about it, and you have like this mysterious music, and then you find out, oh no, this place is for a giant monster. And now the question is, can I survive and escape this place and not get killed by the monster? And the answer is portrayed in energetic music, and now things are falling apart, and like on this uncertainty. Can I? Yeah, a lot of uncertainty in like the dialogue and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't seem like a big thing. Like it seems like a pretty like, well, duh kind of thing. But I think if you lay it out explicitly, it helps with it when you're dealing with a team.
Yeah.
And you're all trying to work towards a goal of, this is what this specific part of the game is for.
That's a big thing. Because, video games are a collaborative team effort generally. At least the games we make are. So having these big, ideas for this part of the game, we're trying to, like, the player is sort of trying to answer this narrative question. And if if everyone working on it has that understanding, that very simple high level understanding, it can just help with the whole.
Yeah.
Oh, Josh just.
Yeah, Josh just mentioned that we were talking about environmental storytelling in the chat, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean
partially.
that's one of the things. Last time we were on the podcast, we were talking about just games in general, and I think like one of the most important things in a story, at least for a video game, is some actually maybe even more just in a video game, but like even in books and movies and stuff. It's just a certain amount of intrigue where you want to present these questions to the player or the viewer or the reader, and then you want them to crave the answer. You want them to persist through and continue watching the movie or continue reading the book or continue playing the game to find the answer to that question, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can do that, and I feel like you guys did a really good job with that with Halon, where like it's like these like, oh, what's this weird planet I'm on, and what the hell is this thing that just fused to my arm, and
Yeah.
it was a really interesting way to present that, and you did that through some amount of environmental storytelling, right? Where you had the ascension motif we discussed earlier, where you're climbing up the level, and you had your little murals as like interlevel objectives, where you sort of expanded on the story and answered specific
Mhm.
questions, right?
Yeah. And back then we weren't explicitly thinking about this kind of
Yeah.
method,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we did it by accident in
Yeah.
certain areas, and
Yeah.
we
I
failed
think
at it in certain other areas.
yes, that's true. Yeah, you can look at the story of Halon, and yeah, there's good parts, there's bad parts. I mean, the notion of these murals, right? Of it's like, oh, I'm traveling. Oh, look, here's these pictures, and then Sharp is going to explain what the pictures are, and that's going to give you a piece of the information. That's like, it's a very like
It's kind of boring.
breadcrumb kind of, yeah. So, not the best, but it was, you know, decently effective,
Yeah.
because we were tying it into this idea that like Sharp is the idea of the game is right. It's like, so Sharp is like seeing, let's say, oh my God, this place is like used to be a library or whatever, and it's like, oh, perhaps, and then it's like, oh my God, I'm learning that this happened, right? Because like Sharp is sort of, he knows part of the story in Halon, and then as you get higher, closer to the present day, he starts not knowing things.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's, he's at, so it's kind of, it sort of transitions in the game from like Sharp knowing everything about what's going on here to like Halon, knowing things, and then it kind of meets in the middle.
Yeah. And then they become friends because they both helped each other out.
Yes.
Don't question it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Because
mean, I think,
sometimes what you know what this is one of my philosophies with storytelling is that we're I'm gonna sound like an old fart, but I feel like what I love is simple, kind of romantic, not the kind of romantic that you might think I'm talking about, but like simple. Uh, I don't know what the word is, but like fantastic, adventurous, just simple themes that kind of
right.
are timeless. And that's why I'm such a fan of the original Star Wars trilogy, is that it wasn't trying to be it wasn't trying to be help me out, David. It
It
wasn't
wasn't,
trying
it
to
wasn't,
be
it was trying to tell like a classic
a
type tale, like,
classic story, yeah, like mythological. And I think that's my inspiration is I like getting into shades of gray and grittiness, but at the end of the day, for me, I like a fun, straightforward tale with simple themes.
I think, and yeah, I think that to some extent, that's yeah, I agree mostly because Like those
And then,
stories.
and then of
kind
course, you
exist,
don't you,
you know,
you,
for
you
a
put your own
reason.
spin on it. You don't just it's not just the princess is taken by the big bad guy and you got to go save them, right?
Um,
It's not always that.
it's not always that. Like, yeah, I think so.
Anyways, you
So
got any more questions for us, Tyson?
yes.
Yeah, so we've been talking about we kind of tie in because storytelling is everywhere, right? It's TV, video, movies, games, books, you name it. Obviously, when you go to the movies, you want a good story because that's pretty much the whole reason you're going is to be immersed in this story. How how important do you feel that storytelling is in a video game? Do you feel it's like extremely important, or do you think that gameplay should have more of a priority, or do you think they they really need to go hand in hand for a game to be extremely successful?
Imagine my horror when I see people skipping those cutscenes I worked so hard on.
Ooh.
No, I think it's okay if people just want to play a game just for fun. Because I think games you can play them multiple times. They're what you need them to be at the time. I think the player has a lot of control over what they want to get out of it. So if I can tell a bit of a story without dialogue and without cutscenes, and they still get a bit of it, then I'm happy.
Yeah, I think that any range of, quote, storyness to non-storyness is like anywhere along that spectrum, you can find a good game.
Yeah.
I don't think that a game needs to have some amount of story or not, because games can be almost anything. That said, I like when, you know, for like I talked about this last episode, but like the Metroid games have at least, the, let's say the 2D one. We'll say Super Metroid has it has like a little intro text crawl and then like a little ending thing. But other than that, there's no dialogue, there's no cutscenes, there's no nothing. The entirety of the story is all about feel. It's all about feeling and that kind of part, and that's conveyed through the environment and just the situations and stuff.
Right.
And that's a perfectly legitimate way to tell a story. It's not as nuanced or interesting. Like you don't really get a strong sense of like Samus's struggles, and but at the same time, it excels in another kind of thing where I really found this in Hyper Light Drifter, because Hyper Light Drifter is a bit more heavy on the story than Super Metroid, but there's zero dialogue, actually zero dialogue,
Like not even text dialogue?
no text.
Oh, damn.
There's no text in the game. And everything you get is just from this visual understanding.
Right.
And there are cutscenes, and pictures and stuff, but everything is from this. So that's
It's like a show don't tell kind of story.
exactly. But
Yeah.
then of course you can still have a great story like, let's say Halo or Uncharted, where they've got, cutscenes and characters and dialogue and drama and action and I think
And still really fun gameplay.
Mm-hmm. The way that
exactly.
the way that I kind of feel about video game stories, I kind of relate it a bit to like Dungeons and Dragons kind of stories, where you've got games like Uncharted, where you've got the dungeon master, Naughty Dog, that really wants to tell you this specific story, right? So they're gonna kind of railroad you in that direction. They're gonna give you some freedom, as you go through combat and stuff, but it's a very linear kind of adventure, right? Where it's like, this is the story I want to tell, and this is the story I want you to experience, and that's what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got more of like the I don't know, kind of like the loosey goosey kind of dungeon masters, like oh god, I don't even know.
Minecraft.
Like, yeah, I'd say Minecraft, but really there is no dungeon master in Minecraft. It's just like I'd say Minecraft is more like the creators of Dungeons and Dragons, where like they're like, here you go, here's some stuff, go nuts.
Go tell your own story.
Yeah, David, I don't know how much you relate to that being a dungeon master yourself, but that's kind of how I picture it, just based off because I don't have a whole lot of experience in writing, well, really anything,
Well,
but I have experience in playing video games. I know what kind of video games I like, where there's a specific story that they want to tell. Obviously, the gameplay is just as important because if it's boring gameplay, I'm gonna get bored and then not care about the story.
right.
But it's the same sort of idea for D&D, right? Where it's like,
Well,
this is a cool story. I want to learn more about it.
yeah, I think that just like there's any number of video games, I think there's any number of like ways to tell a story in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
That's a big whole multiple episode topic right there. But that I do think that there are definitely similarities. But just briefly, I'll just say that in D&D, it's not a story. You're not telling a story. You're experiencing things that are happening, and if therefore it's not limited to, you can try to impose like a narrative arc on things, but
Yeah.
it's not always going to happen. Not a guarantee. So Josh here has a good point. He said that story should come second after gameplay. If games focus too much on the story, they don't have too much gameplay. We get games like Heavy Rain or Telltale's The Walking Dead. They're still good, but not for their gameplay. You enjoy them similar to a movie, and I think that is a good point.
Yeah.
A very good point. That I do agree that in a video game, because it's a video game, the gameplay. I think that this is not necessarily like this is the right answer, but I do think that I'm more on the side of the gameplay should come before the story. Like the game should still be fun,
Yeah.
independent
Of the story.
of the story. And if a game needs a story to be good, then it's not really a good game. It's more just like a something like a what do you call them? Like a more like a like a Telltale style game, right?
Right.
It's
I
a
can't
Black Mirror.
I can't speak for all Telltale games, but the ones that I've played, the actual gameplay, quote unquote, hasn't like the good parts have been like, oh look, there's like dialogue and there's like choices, but that's like very lightly gameplay,
Yeah.
And yeah, it's more like a kind of like a choose your own adventure, kind of like a visual novel sort of situation.
Right.
That's why I
which is-
really liked Mass Effect, because you had that dialogue options and a story that you could control, but also there was a lot of gameplay that was pretty good involved.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, we did this for Halon, where like I said way at the beginning of the podcast, we had a gameplay idea first,
Right.
and then we thought, what story can be told in this kind of thing, and then then that informed the gameplay, like Michael had said before. Gameplay and story kind of mixing together.
Right.
Because I think that just as I guess the final point, I think that gameplay and story can mix together. I think that you can get really good, really interesting games when the gameplay is supporting the story through, just making you feel like you're in this world and experiencing the story through the mechanics and the environments. And at the same time, the story can enhance and support the gameplay because it gives you a motivation about like why you're doing these things and a context for what's going on. And I think that when you consider both of them, it makes a stronger experience than just having one and then being like, I guess we have to have the other, which some games do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think constricting yourself always leads to some better results in all creative fields. Like if you're given if you're a kid in an art room and they just say the teacher just says, hey, make whatever you want, you're not going to get a lot of inspired work if you just have you can use the clay, you can use the crayons, you can use everything. If you put all the tools together, it's just going to be a mess, and it's going to take all day to make. But if you're said, okay, you can use only these 3 colors of crayons, it's going to force you to get creative, and you might do something that you would have never thought of doing before because you were forced to do something that you weren't kind of prepared to do before, but you had to think on your toes while you're at it. And I think that's why gameplay is such a cool thing to inform story, is that your story is held down to earth, I suppose, by what you're capable of doing with your game's story.
Right.
Or sorry, with your game's gameplay and environments and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Josh just reinforced David's point earlier. He said that gameplay reflecting the world you are in is really important. For example, if you play a game like Metroid or Doom, you want to be this powerhouse of a character. But if you play things like Dark Souls, you want to feel weak, so if you overcome a challenge, it feels even better.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's that whole idea of gameplay enhancing the story and the story enhancing the gameplay, and how they kind of go hand in hand in a way that doesn't really occur in any other media, which I think is probably the coolest thing about video games, is that you get this opportunity to immerse yourself in a world in a way that we haven't really seen before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I like writing story for games above all else.
Yeah. Bringing it back to us as a company really quickly, this is my last question that I'm thinking of. Because, we're a team of people and we all have different opinions. Like in this podcast, we've talked about how, I really like having a good story in a game, and David mentioned that, he thinks that gameplay is more important. If you're coming up with ideas in your story, you're not always going to all agree on the same idea, right? So coming from experience working on Halon and on our current, new idea, what sort of advice would you give to other team developers to, kind of resolve those disputes and come up with ideas that like the whole team can agree on, if that makes any sense?
Can I answer this, David, or go ahead, David?
Oh, well, I guess to me it all comes down to having like anything, any kind of like group. They need to have some kind of guiding like vision or idea that everyone's kind of on board with, so that you can ensure that everyone's trying to head in the same direction with the story or the gameplay or the art style or anything. That's a pretty broad. I think that story writing has the same kind of things that make it work in a team as anything else. Just good, just awareness of like what other people want and collaborating so that everyone kind of is on the same page. Ha ha ha! Writing words. But yeah, that's all I really have to say on that. Michael, it sounds like you got something.
Yeah, I watch a lot of debates, and I think the debate format is useful when you're having like 6 people talk about it, like try to hash out a story, and you're coming up with ideas for how to take things forward. I think so. So you have those pillars, which is the question and answer, overarching idea, and then when you're filling in the blanks, I think, at least for us, what we did a lot was I would come up with an idea and I would say, okay, here's my idea for how we're going to solve this problem of the story. Here's my reasons. Now attack them. And then everyone would go around and say, okay, here's why this is a good idea. Here's why I think this is a bad idea. And then I would alter the idea a little bit, try to compromise or reinforce why I think they're wrong and I'm right. And then hopefully by the end of that, we'd have some sort of interesting idea that helps push forward through the problem we were having with the story at that time. And then we lay it down and we go to the next part, and maybe someone will have a good idea. And so I don't think when we were discussing story, when we have our story meetings, I don't think I really laid that out, but it kind of fell into that a lot. Was just these mini debates. Were you getting that vibe, David?
Maybe a little bit. One thing that I think I've noticed is that just because of how things are, we as a group don't, there's a lot of, well, let's say passion as far as the art style and that stuff is concerned. But with the story, I think that we're all more aligned in what we want, so there's less
conflict.
horrible arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was saying debates rather than arguments. We had short little debates and then we moved on, which was good. I'm glad we. I find that in story we all get along pretty well.
Yeah, it helps to have a team that sort of everyone has a similar sort of like you said, like we're all pretty big sci-fi and fantasy fans, so it helps having a team that all enjoys the same kind of story.
Yeah,
it definitely leads to a lot less fighting and arguments and more like what you said, Michael, more just like debating on like like that sounds good, but what if we do it this way?
Yeah, here's option 1 and 2 sound cool, but here's option 3.
How do we convey this? I think that this would convey this theme better. Oh.
Yeah.
And then you work your way around the circle and you got 26 different opinions.
It gets messy.
But just to bring that into like a game context, because at the same time as we're thinking about these acts, we're thinking about levels.
Yeah.
And we're thinking about, oh, hey, well, in this level, what if this kind of thing is there, or this kind of thing happens, and this can be a moment that means something for this reason.
Mm-hmm. Or even, what if this happens? Oh, that leads to that'd be a really cool gameplay encounter. Or gameplay, yeah.
Right, yeah. And then that's, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because it's like if you come up with this idea for like, it gets to this point in the level, and they find this, this huge betrayal or something, and then they wind up fighting an old friend or something, right? That's another instance where you're, intertwining story where maybe you build up and, show this relationship between these two people before the betrayal so that it hurts all the more. And then, you've got the option of showing off this cool, you've got a cool boss fight now that you can work with. Like, okay, cool. Now that there's this betrayal, maybe like, you get a little more angry when you play. So you're like your cooldowns or whatever, if you have cooldowns in your game, maybe they get a little shorter, right? And it's this intermeshing of things.
Yeah. And, something that can be a problem, something where gameplay and story can kind of butt heads, is sometimes you have ideas for things that are gameplay things that don't end up meshing well together. Like you have, oh man, well here's these different ideas for bosses that you could fight, or these different abilities that you can have in the game, and you could be like, then you're making the story and you're like, well, does it really make sense for this, where are we going to put this boss character, right? Are they just going to come out of nowhere in this scene just because we can't find out any other narrative way to fit them in?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you gotta concede things on both sides.
Yeah. Jasmine in the chat just asked if Halon on paper was different than Halon in gameplay, which I think we addressed a little bit earlier on when we mentioned that there was a lot of stuff that was planned and written that wound up getting cut just due to the timeline that you had, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything else in particular you can think of.
I think that in general, like in broad sense, Halon on paper was the same as the game.
Yeah.
It's just that Halon in the game was, more focused, more just like you get, as the process gets further along, you get more pragmatic, right? Because initially you're like making this story, you write this script and you're like, oh great, it's a great story, and then you're reading it and you're like, okay, well maybe that's a little much in that part, let's trim it down, whatever, blah blah blah. And then as you're incorporating it into the game, you're like, actually we don't need this dialogue because or we can't use this dialogue, so
Yeah.
So I think it could work fine without it, right? You get more and more less fanciful and high-minded and more in the nitty-gritty of like, can we fit this whole conversation into this tiny chunk of this level? I don't think we can.
It's all about scope.
Yeah. And Halon on paper is more like this thing. Imagine a million papers strewn across a room, and us, and then in gameplay, it's us carefully picking up the best ones and hoping hoping that the staples hold them together.
Yeah, hoping that the story still makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good metaphor.
So we're hoping with future projects that our new methods that we've come up with hopefully are slightly less terrifying.
I guess to close it off for the night, if you were to go back in time to around the writing period of Halon, knowing what you know now, what's like one thing that you would change about either the process or the story itself that you think would have improved the final product?
That's a fantastic question, Tyson.
It's a great question. Which is the kind of thing you say when you don't have an answer ready.
David, would you say, you know what, guys, go take it easy on the cutscenes a bit more. You don't need to do as much. Or do you think the cutscenes were important?
I think that the cutscenes were, to me, I think that the cutscenes were one of the things that really set Halon above, you know, what, like it was really like a big thing to have like these full cutscenes. So I like having them. I mean, we can talk about like, I think we're talking about narrative terms here, because if I'm talking about just like, oh, what would, in a pragmatic way from the story part of it, what would I cut? I'd be like, hey, you need to realize that mocapping someone who's on the ground is not, it's bad. It's a bad idea. Don't do it.
We should have hand animated that part.
Yes. But that's not really the point of the question.
Yeah, I guess as far as story goes,
I think...
I think it's perfect in every way. And no, I think we would have better. I would have liked to have better defined who Halon is a bit more. I think she's a bit.
Yeah.
She's a bit too nebulous in who she is specifically, and that just comes down to time.
Yeah, and the same thing with
because we had like sorry David for cutting you off, but we had like an intro story that set her up a bit better, but we had to cut that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
So yeah, well, I think that in general, I think my main thing, honestly, I would have wanted to set Theraval up better, because in the game he just kind of shows up.
Yeah.
He just kind of shows up. He's like, the doctor sent me. I'm gonna kill you now. And you're like, what?
Now, to be fair, we did put little sound effects in. We put his sound effects, so at least we were thinking about it. Like, we felt bad about it, but it was too late to change anything.
We had the notion that, oh, hey, we need to foreshadow something's gonna happen. But, like, that's the thing, right? In a gameplay sense, it was a bit foreshadowed, but not narratively. There's no narrative. Here's the trick. Right? Theraval showing up is not really the narrative payoff to anything. It kind of is. It kind of is from like, it never gets established that the doctor's like, hey, don't activate the artifact. And then Halon's like, I'm going to activate the artifact. And then, oh, you activate the artifact. Theraval's now going to kill you, right? There was none of that, right?
Yeah.
Theraval
originally we had, like, the doctor would be talking to you throughout, and that's why Theraval exists, is as a character that's sent by the doctor, because we had all this dialogue back and forth between you and the doctor, and then it was convoluted, and it added like an extra element to the game that wasn't necessary, so we just cut it. And by cutting out all these things, the intro, the doctor talking to you, it caused Theraval to be kind of this little island floating out there that we still needed.
Yeah, because, otherwise the game wouldn't really have a boss fight, right?
Yeah. We could have made it like a big card, but we wanted it to be something from Halon's life, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the key, right? Is that was this notion of this old and new, right? This kind of core idea at the center of Halon.
Yeah. You got these 2 levels of old stuff, and then we want to slap you in the face with something from Halon's world.
Yeah, like the Karks are technically new stuff, but they weren't really like. Theraval was really like, "Hey, Halon, I'm directly confronting you about something," right?
Yeah.
I'm not just a passive environmental hazard or robot that happens to be there.
Right.
Yeah, so
speaking,
that's what I would change, I think.
Speaking as an outsider, if you guys want my critique,
Sure.
When I sat down at the senior project fair and I played Halon, I really liked it, obviously, mostly because my opinion is very biased because you guys were all my friends and, you know, I'd been following you guys all year. But, you know, I sat down, I played the game, and it kind of felt like, you remember back in the day, you'd get like demo discs for like some games where it was like a chunk of a game that you could play through? That's what it felt like. It felt like I was just getting like a taste of a game.
To be fair, it was far, far bigger and longer than any of the other games.
That's definitely true. I'm not critiquing. I'm not critiquing you guys. I'm just saying that's actually. I guess I kind of am. But
well, we end the game in a way that everyone's always like, oh boy, here, let's go. I'm ready for the next part.
Yeah.
But it never comes.
And then it never happens. So yeah, that's kind of what I walked away with it. It was like, it was more like a demo disc or like a proof of concept to me, where it was like, this is.
Well, what other senior project games set up a sequel?
Yeah. So, you know, like, it's definitely for a senior project game and for, you know, a year's worth of development and having many other things that have to be worked on in your final year. It's still like, you guys set the bar really friggin' high. But it also felt like there was more that I was missing. Because, like, you know, you start out, you land on this planet, you're this person. It's like, okay, who am I? Why am I here? Right? Yeah. So it's like, you know, it's the kind of thing where with more time, you can develop the beginning a bit more and kind of like build up the exposition.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said I wanted to develop Halon more, because you don't. Yeah. That question isn't answered enough in the game. It's answered, but not in a timely fashion. That's for sure.
But yeah, so continue.
I mean, that was really it. That was it. That was my critique. It was just, you know, it was like just a taste of the delicious spaghetti sauce that is.
Yeah. So then after that game, we made the Blobs fight, which has 0 story because we burned ourselves out on story. We actually did have ideas for it to be like in the Halon universe, and like basically there was it's like a dog fighting type thing in the Halon universe.
And then it just turned into a party game.
But then the guys wanted there to be top hats.
Yeah, literally top hats are the reason the Blobs fight is not a Halon universe game. It's and I'm not bitter.
To some extent, in the end, I think I do agree.
Oh yeah, I'm fine with it now.
It's like having the freedom to just have this goofy, like, context-free game where there's Blobs just in whatever kind of costume. It was a good idea in the end. It would have if we were like, no, this has to take place in the Halon universe. So like that would have completely limited us in so many like ways that wouldn't have made the game a better game. I think. But
guys, Teltona is above the moon level. It isn't.
That is true.
Universe. It is.
That level is in universe. That's canon. Except for now, don't we have an update where we added a bunch of like moon.
There's like a moon
bases and stuff. So yeah, never mind. It's no longer canon.
Don't question.
It was briefly canon.
Briefly canon. Now it's been demoted to a reference.
We pulled a Disney where it was like, yeah, look at all these like Star Wars books and stuff. This is all canon. Psych, it's all gone. This is expanded universe now.
That's expanded universe now. The Blobs fight officially legends.
All right, I think that's where we'll call it for tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much to everyone joining us live on Twitch. And if any of you are listening on YouTube or on Spotify, iTunes, whatever, thank you very much for listening in. And we will see you all next time.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.